4, 3, 2, 1. You are live, you are live.
Morning, or should I say g'day to you there in New South Wales, Australia, the Taronga Zoo and the Western Plains Zoo, if I've got that correct. You are most welcome to this, our very early, well, it's supposed to be a morning, it's kind of middle of the night here, but the hyenas are calling behind us, the baboons are waking up off behind where you're sitting now. And to my left, of course, is not a baboon or a hyena, but Stefan Winterboer.
Good morning.
And my name is James, and we're here to chat to you about World Environmental Day. Now, it's not only the Australians of Taronga Zoo and Western Plains Zoos that are with us. We have people around the world joining us for Safari Live this morning. A sort of early version of the normal game drive. Brent and Jamie are out on drive, frantically searching the reserve with their spotlights to see maybe there'll be some creatures of the night. And we must welcome especially Hayden Turner, who set this all up for us, and it's great. We initially were quite nervous to get out of bed at 3:30 in the morning, of course, but then we realized that the chances of seeing a suite of animals that we might not see normally is always there, so that's a very good thing. Now, immediately off the bat, we have a question from Hayley, and I'll get to your question now, Hayley. But everybody, please do talk to us. Hashtag Safari Live on Twitter, or questions at WildEarthTV. That's the general idea here. You're on a live it is a fireside chat, I suppose, in the morning, and you'll shortly be on a live game drive. And so any questions about Africa or South Africa and related to the particular topic of World Environmental Day will be much appreciated. So that's the idea. Hayley, you want to know what the best part of our jobs is. Well, apart from getting up at 3:30 in the morning, I'm going to throw this one over to Stefan so that you might hear his sultry, velvety voice for the first time this morning.
Well, good morning, everybody, firstly. I know, James, I think the best part of the job is probably that early morning coffee right now. I think it's a nice time of the day. It always feels a bit fresh, sunrise, turning the sky a different color, and I don't know, there's always just something fresh about a new morning. You get to hear what's going on. There's lions roaring in the distance as we speak. There was one walking through camp last night. It just gives us sense of purpose to a morning. That's probably about my favorite thing about the job.
Certainly gives a sense of excitement and expectation. The dawn is the kind of expectation time in the bush, and now I'm sure you are all expectantly wanting to see what's going on actually out in the wild. We are out in the wild, but we're not moving. So let's hand you over to Jamie Patterson, and she'll tell you exactly what her plan is for the next few hours.
Good morning and welcome to the Taronga and Western Plains Zoo and all of the rest of our viewers across the globe, and welcome to our sunrise safari in the dark. My name is Jamie, and this morning I have the wonderful Brian Joubert on camera with me, and together we will be heading out to find you all of the exciting things that happen at this hour just before dawn, the darkest time out here in the bush, and also somewhat chilly. So chilly, in fact, that I've got my incredibly wonderful, thank you Kirsty, who is in final control, my wonderful beanie on, that has led some viewers to express concern that I might be carried away by a bird of prey due to the ridiculous pom-pom sitting on my head. Well, that would certainly go viral. Now, Val, you were wondering about what the hardest part of our job is. Belle was wondering what the hardest part of our job is. Sure, that's a difficult question. There you go. That's the hardest part of our job. There are so many wonderful things about this job that the hard parts seem to sort of fade into insignificance. There's always the little stresses and niggles when something breaks, or a flat tire, or whatever else happens to be a reality of life in the bush. And I guess sometimes dealing with the harshness of nature and the interaction between human beings and the wilderness area, that for me is probably one of the hardest aspects of this job. But other than that, I definitely can't complain. It's always exciting, especially heading out at this time in the morning, because you just don't know what's going to be down the road. Last night I was coming back from an exhausting, speaking of hard parts of the job, an exhausting trip into our nearest town to buy us some supplies. for various exciting projects, and I was coming back in the dark at 6 o'clock, and as I was driving from the gate towards the camp, I just spotted some eyes right in the distance, and our dominant male leopard, the biggest leopard that we have in this area, Tingana, came walking down the road towards me. Slow, steady, just padding down the road to come and have a look. And he passed so close to my vehicle. Oh, my hat's fallen off already. He passed so close to my vehicle that he practically rubbed his cheek against the bumper. And I was looking down at him from my perspective. I was looking down from the window straight into his gorgeous, luminous eyes. It was a magical moment. Ooh. I've just come across to the waterhole to see what we can see. But all is quiet here on the top northwestern corner of Djuma at Sydney's Dam. So while we continue a check of the northern boundary, go and see if we can't find those lions that were calling all through the night, let's head over to Brent and Wiem so that they can also say good morning to you.
Welcome to literally deepest, darkest Africa on this before sunrise safari. My name is Nat.Geo Smith. I have Wiem on camera with me, and it is pretty cold, but we're out here. And what's really exciting about being out at this time of the morning, which we don't do often, is that 75% of your more interesting mammal species are only out in the hours of darkness. And there is maybe a little bit of friendly competition this morning to see who can find the elusive aardvark. Now, being out at this time is probably our best chance at finding some of those weird and wonderful nocturnal creatures. Sometimes it is a little bit quiet though. Of course, we're not able to shine our torches or spotlights onto any of the diurnal species. With the makeup of their eyes, it tends to blind them slightly, and we're here to observe, not to interfere. So we won't help the predator or prey. Well, a very good morning to Bex, and Bex is wondering, while eating her lunch in the middle of the day, Sydney, what animals are we most wanting to see at this time of the morning? Well, it's going to be your small and interesting nocturnal mammals, as well as your big hairies and scary carnivores. So any of the small mammals, a civet, white-tailed mongoose, honey badger, as I said, aardvark, pangolin even possibly, all very rare to see. Then of course the lion, leopard, hyena. So we'll just have to get out there. Wiem and I are checking an area where we had female leopard tracks yesterday. We're trying to make sure she hasn't moved further to the west. We've got two different females that have cubs at the moment, and they both operate from here to the east. And if we get no luck there, I think we might head to the sort of northeast and give Jamie a hand with those lions. They were making a massive racket throughout the night, and of course, as soon as we get going, silence. But really exciting to have the Taronga Zoo with us, and happy 100-year birthday, guys. That's really, really an amazing feat. But while we continue to scour through the dark, let's go back to Commander Bond, who's sitting nice and happy, much warmer than us, next to the fire.
Yes, I suppose we probably are a bit warmer, the wind not rushing through our faces like it is with Nat.Geo Smith. At least he has the locks around his head to keep his head warm. Now, wonderful question from Kirsty about pangolins, which of course is a very good way to bring up the topic of World Environmental Day. Pangolins, of course, are the most illegally trafficked mammals in the world. Not the African version of it, but before we get onto it, I just want to show you quickly a clip of said pangolin the other day.
Isn't that incredible? Look at that, a pangolin! Isn't this exciting? He's just laid down. This is my first pangolin in the Northern Sabi Sands. Look at him. Look at those armor plates. Now, if you get your finger stuck in there, it can actually cut you. Look at him. So, these short grass areas are home to the pugnacious ant, and 98% of a pangolin's diet is a pugnacious ant. Dave, well spotted.
Now, Brent's excitement there is well founded. We don't often see pangolins here, of course. That's the African version of it. You do get another tree pangolin in the northern or the central parts of Africa, don't you? And I think it's the Asian version of the pangolin that is probably the most trafficked animal. Still, that pangolin is used out here, isn't it, for traditional medicine? Do you know particularly for what?
I don't actually. It's got something to do with the rain in some instances, and then they use them in jewelry as well. So they thread a hole through the scales, and they use them as ornaments in jewelry. But yeah, as to exactly what they're used for outside of Africa and what makes them so desirable, I don't know. Yeah.
Very nice question there. I think it was from Simon. Is that correct, Kirsty? Yes, Simon. Simon, you want to know if our government is, or governments around Africa are particularly efficient when it comes to sort of prosecuting and supporting the prosecution of poaching. Simon, I think that relatively, I think that's not really where the problem lies for me. For me, the problem lies in this nexus or articulation between where you've got conflicted areas. You've got areas in Africa that are supposed to be protected, and all around them you've got huge numbers of very poor people. Now, if we look at the history of conservation, certainly in Africa, and I don't know much about it in the rest of the world, but I think it is fairly similar. You know, let's take the Kruger National Park. The Kruger National Park was proclaimed finally in 1926, if I'm not mistaken, but its precursor, the Sabi National, or the Sabi Game Reserve, was proclaimed in 1898. That's correct, isn't it? Now, the reason for that was the denuded number of game in the area. It was decided that the animals of the area had been denuded to the extent that they needed some kind of protection. Now, the local people were not the ones responsible for that. It was the white settlers who came in with their guns and their greed, basically, and their need to sell ivory around the place, and certainly the market created by the white settlers that denuded this area of elephants. And I read one account that said when the Sabi Game Reserve was finally proclaimed in 1898, there were probably about 10 elephants in the area. Now just think about that, 10 elephants in an area. The Sabi Game Reserve was about half the size of the Kruger Park, so it was probably about 10,000 square kilometers, a fairly big piece of land. 10 elephants, that's one elephant per 1,000 square kilometers. It wasn't the local people involved in that. And yet, when they fenced out the park and they started removing people out of the protected area, it wasn't the white settlers they took out, it was the people who had been deriving a living from the park for a long time. And so this happened throughout Africa, and it's created a sense of resentment in some cases, and it's certainly created a sense of disempowerment in many cases. So no matter how brilliant your law enforcement is, no matter how supportive your government is of prosecution, until you sort that articulation out, where you've got these poverty-stricken people living on the borders of a potential resource, that's where we're going to have the problem. And so that's the kind of issue I think that we need to be thinking about. Steph?
That and also the fact that where animals come from quite often is not advertised, where the market for the final product is. Let's take rhino horn, for instance. Rhinos are poached and killed in South Africa. They're then turned into a powder, and that powder is then sold in markets all over the world. But there's very little information there for the local people to be able to accurately judge, what am I buying here? They're buying a medicine or a vial of powder. They don't really know where it comes from. There's no real connection between them and the animal. So there's no emotional or emotion attached to that. That needs to be created as well. So on the market side as well, people need to be made aware that animal products or the derivatives of animal products, and it's not rhino horn is obviously just one very prominent one, but it's where down to where you get your food from. It's all good. It is. It's all good questions to ask. for yourselves that are sitting far away and in other countries, it's a good thing to ask yourself, what am I buying? Where does it come from? Is it sustainably used? I think that is also a message that everyone can sort of practice.
It's a very nice point. So, I mean, whether it's rhino horn or whether it's a tomato that you're buying at the local supermarket, where is it grown? How is it created, and how did it get to where it is? So going on to a question from Beck there about what Australians can do to stop the illegal ivory trade, I don't know. I mean, not buy it, obviously, but I think spreading the message is the big thing. That so the Western world, of course, with technology, and I use the term Western in the loosest possible sense, I just mean areas, the first world, if you like. We've got technology. We've got the ability to communicate, and I think communication is the big thing. But I also think that there needs to be communication around what it is that national parks are, what it is that protected areas are, how they were created. Because I hear huge amounts, and we get comments, of course, from all over the world, and some of them we don't read out live, and some of them we do. And quite often, there's a misunderstanding, I think, of where the problem lies, and it is a holistic problem. It's not a question of shooting the poachers on site. It's a question, yes, of course there needs to be security on site. There's got to be effective prosecution. There's got to be a reduction of markets. There has to be some kind of education that goes into local communities. But it comes, I think, for me, and I don't know this for sure because I'm certainly not an expert in it, and there are many people around the world that are doing their level best to try and stop this trade. But for me, it comes down to conscious living. What are you eating? Where does it come from? So every time, for example, I like to use this example. When you turn your kettle on, right? We were sitting in World Environmental Day, so this is relevant. If you turn your kettle on, there's a baboon or something in a tree.
It's important that we stay aware of the fact that we're not just sitting next to a fire in the middle of some...
Yes, in a studio. Anyway, so when you put your kettle on to boil water for your tea, and you're sitting in a home that is perhaps centrally heated, I know in Australia you don't need much central heating, but perhaps you've got a heater on somewhere, and perhaps you're going to go and sit on a deck outside where there's either some light or there's a wooden floor that's come from somewhere. Your consumption of energy in the first world, just by making that one cup of coffee and going to sit down there, is probably 10 times the daily energy consumption of a family of 5 or 6 people that live in a rural area without those kind of facilities. And what often happens is that people have this impression that rural Africans or rural Asians or rural South Americans or wherever they are denuding areas. So we go into a natural area like this and we see people chopping down a tree with a matchet, and we think, oh, look at these people, they just don't understand. Here they are destroying the forests, destroying the area, with their matchets. They're just not consciously thinking about what they're doing. Well, is that really true every time you push down the toaster or turn the kettle on? So it's a really multifaceted problem, and I think in the first world we don't really have an appreciation of exactly the complexity of those problems. Behind us, the hyenas are calling. Let's go and see if Jamie Patterson has managed to find one of them.
While you were with Mr. Henry, Brian and myself have been investigating the northern boundary of Djuma, and I have found, to my not real astonishment, that there are lion tracks of one big male lion walking west, so in the opposite direction to what I'm driving, but walking west along the boundary. Now, tracking at this sort of time of night is particularly difficult. My apologies, I'm just double checking what I'm seeing. Because having a look at the tracks without the light makes things a bit more tricky. And it also doesn't help that an entire herd of elephants has come wandering through at some point in the night. We've been seeing more and more elephants, and they've stomped all over my lion tracks, but we'll be heading back. I'm going to do a big loop and then head back in that direction. Now, Emma, you would like to know what my most extraordinary wildlife experience would be. And that is such a difficult question to answer, but I'll have to go with a job that I had previously, and it's tough. I mean, there are so many. We've had the most incredible experiences recently with the Queen of Djuma, a leopard called Karula, and her cubs that fall very, very high up on my sort of ratings of wildlife experiences. But Emma, I'll have to tell you a story about a place where I used to work, where we spent probably about, I would say, 6 out of 7 days looking for rhino at least once a day. Different types, and because it was a closed system, I knew each and every rhino individually by name. And one day, very sadly, I was walking and found Pango, Meshuggah and Gonzalez, 3 rhino, in the aftermath of a poaching incident. Now, as you can imagine, that's the distressing part of the story, but it starts to make sense. If you can imagine what we felt like after that, having monitored those animals for months and months and months, and got to know each and every one of them. And I found it particularly distressing, and I got to the point where I actually didn't want to see the rest of the rhino in that area, just because it made me so incredibly sad. However, I went on a walk one day, and I started walking along following tracks, and I came upon a young female called Ganda Ganda. Now, Ganda Ganda means tractor. A young female white rhinoceros, aptly named Tuku Tuku Tuku. Ganda Ganda is the local name. And Ganda Ganda was standing there, and all of a sudden, between her and myself, I was on foot, this tiny little head popped up with these enormous oversized ears, and she'd had her very first baby, her first calf in her lifetime. Precious little girl, and this thing was still stumbling. It was only a couple of days old, still stumbling, and it came wandering towards me with all the trust in the world in its eyes. And it made not everything better, but it certainly helped. And she is alive and well. Her mom has now had another calf, and she's off on her own exploring as a young female rhino is wont to do. Her name, we never actually named her in the end. We originally thought about calling her May, because she was born in May. But that to me was my most fantastic wildlife experience, because it was about hope more than anything else. It was hope for the future. And then shortly after that, or just before that actually, we found Belega's calf, and the population started to recover themselves. And none of the rhino in that area have been poached since. So a happy end to that story. I think that would be my most fantastic wildlife experience. However, the list just keeps building, and that's what's so exciting about this, is there's just so much out here to see. And as the drought sort of closes its fist in this area, it is getting more and more difficult. The animals struggling for food, not necessarily water, but definitely struggling for food. And they're starting to move out of the Kruger National Park and towards the Sabi Sands. So the Kruger National Park is to the east of us, and there's very little water and very little food left in that particular area. So the animals are all coming this way, which is why we're seeing, having spoken about those elephant tracks, which is why we are seeing such an influx of elephants, for one, and other animals. But for the predators, these are the dog days, so to speak. The best time for them. The animals all forced around water holes, all forced into sort of limited areas, and the predators taking full advantage of that. Now we've got brand new leopard cubs, we have brand new lion cubs in our traverse area, so all is very, very exciting. The reason I'm not immediately following those lion tracks is there's just one set. In other words, only one of the male lions walked along that road. There are 4 of them, 4 that Hayden would be most familiar with, the Birmingham boys. And Hayden actually termed the phrase, or coined the phrase, the Birmingham boys. So that's who we're looking for this evening. Right, while we continue our search for lions and other creatures of the evening, let's head back to James in the tent.
Hello everybody. Belle, a very nice question from you about whether or not our viewers and the guests that come to this area are changed, and whether their attitudes to wildlife are changed by being here or by viewing the show. Well, just to clarify for those of you who perhaps don't know, we sit in the Sabi Sands, which is 60,000 hectares, and many of the sort of small private reserves on the Sabi Sands, which are unfenced between each other, contain commercial safari lodges, and Steph and I cut our teeth at many of these commercial lodges down to the south of where we are now. And, well, I think your question's a good one. I'm going to hand it over to Steph to give his impressions first, and then I'll tell you what I think.
Well, Belle, I don't think, I mean, without getting too deep into how people feel, I think the most noticeable thing is, I think, people come here and have a safari that's not just about looking at animals. They come here and they experience the place. And when you go and experience a place, you can't help but be changed by it. You can't help but be changed by the fact that, you know, South Africa is a wonderful place and wilderness areas are wonderful, and, you know, you just, wonder comes to mind if I want to describe what most people leave here with. And then the sense to come back, I think, is also an overwhelming sensation. Very rarely do we have people that come out to areas like this and say, oh, I never want to come back, it was the most terrible experience of my life. I think probably in all the years we've been doing this, a handful of times. So I think, a sense of wanting to come back, wanting to participate, wanting to do something, you know, but by far and wide, I think people do go home and open their eyes to the fact that there's a greater world out there, and it's not just through a medium like you're watching right now. You know, you actually have to get there and stick your toes in the sand and, you know, sweat a bit
and get a thorn in your foot, perhaps. I think for me, it's such an important thing that tourists come out here, that they come and they see what we have to offer. And I mean, the lodges out here are generally fairly expensive, but you can go to the Kruger National Park and drive yourself around. And if you're operating on the Australian dollar or the American version thereof or a British pound, it costs you virtually nothing to come out here. I mean, compared with a holiday that you could have anywhere else around Europe, for example, or America or Australia, it really is virtually nothing, virtually free, with the exchange rate the way it is at the moment. It's not good. Anyway, the thing is, though, do people come out here and they see some amazing things? They take some great pictures and they go home and they're amazed by the elephants and the lions and the leopards and the buffalo and the giraffe and the wild dogs if they're really lucky, and the cheetah perhaps as well. But do they leave with a sense of connection to the wild? And that, for me, is the crucial thing. And I think some people do, and I think certainly with Wild Earth, that's what we're trying to achieve, is to give people a deeper connection to the wilderness, so that they have a sense of the wild and they have a sense that there's something worth preserving. And it's my hope that people who come out here, and I know a lot of the lodges do this, that they are connected with the wildlife and they're connected with the people that live outside as well. Because without that, I'm going to bang on about it for quite a while, without that, it's pointless them going home and saying, we saw all the elephants and the elephants are so beautiful, we need to save them. But you've got to understand what that actually means. Right, so while you ponder that extremely deep topic, let's head across to Brent Leo Smith and find out if he's tracking something.
We're sitting here next to one of the only natural seeps in this part of the northern Sabi Sands. And around me you can see how the elephants have dug it up, and there is actually water right at the bottom there, but it's very, very little. And the ellies will come back and dig here. Now this is right on the base of a seep line, which is a really important sort of natural thing out here, but I'll speak a little bit more about that shortly. Now the most interesting thing about that is most of the Sabi Sands used to be, after failed cattle ranching, became sort of private hunting land for a lot of wealthy landowners. And this particular seep has probably been here for the last couple of 100 years. And if we follow my torch, and we go up into this marula tree, there's the remnant of an old tree house. Tree house is a strong word. It was actually a hunting platform. So they built a flat platform. The hunters used to lie up there and wait for animals to come to the only little bit of water that would have been in this area during the dry season. And it's amazing to think that was probably still in use in the 70s. But now, no hunting. Everything is conservation based in the Sabi Sands. There's no active hunting of anything. And I just find it incredible that in such a short time there's been such a positive change. And seep lines are one of my little pet passions around here. And they're very important because a lot of people don't understand about why certain areas hold animals and why certain areas don't. So it's all great having a large swathe of land, but whether that's going to hold animals or not is a different question. And the reason for that is that you can kill an animal in a field of grass if it's the wrong type of grass. And I know Taronga's got to leave us, so it's been great having you. And hopefully we'll see you again on the safaris. But Western Plains is continuing on with us, so I'm going to just finish up my little seep line story. So what seep lines are lateritic soils, and that means it's sand on top of clay. And that's the lateral or natural lateral movement of water from the high ground down. Now these areas not only hold the best grass species, so have the highest carrying capacity, they also hold the water. And animals like elephants are able to access the water, and accessing that water creates little sort of almost oases in a very dry area. So you'll find, I found porcupine have been drinking out of there. You'll find a lot of other little animals, a lot of herbivores as well, will all focus on these areas specifically in the dry season because they are holding the best grass and the most water. Now when you look for the best grass, you find the most herbivores. Where you find the most herbivores, you find the most predators. So we are still in search, hopefully, of a big cat. And let's continue on. Ooh, chilly, chilly. Well, okay, before we move on, and quite often it's more important to use your ears to find animals specifically in the dark. And speaking of big cats, Dr. Larry would like to know, how do you identify individual leopards? Now, a lot of people use, I know with camera trap stuff, they use the different spots on the side. Fortunately, our leopards are relaxed enough that we don't need to try to work out little individual spots. So we use, let's just find it here quickly. There's a nice easy one. The last line of spots above the whiskers. So there, she's actually a 4-4 female. So she's got 4 spots above the whiskers and 4 spots. You read from right to left. Of course, 4-4, you can read both ways. So that's the best and easiest way. It's like a little fingerprint on each individual leopard. But as you spend more time with the leopards, you are able to almost identify them immediately just from their body shape, size. Also, where you see them plays a very important role. And if you spend a lot of time like we do in a single area, you are able to work out to a degree, not exactly, because the big cats forgot to read the guidebook, so they can do whatever they want. But to a degree, what area you're most likely to find certain individuals in. Now, we've got to be careful here. There's lots of little elephant excavations. We don't want to fall into one of those and get stuck. While VM and I continue our search for nocturnal critters, let's go back to James, who's sitting toasty by the fire.
And toasty by the fire we most surely are. That, did you notice the little hint of jealousy there in Brent Leo Smith's voice? Ah, shame. Ah, well, here we are, Stefan and I, toasting by the fire quietly. And Julia, you want to know about other endangered species that are here and the most rare animals that we get. Well, I like this question because it's actually not that simple to answer. We could easily answer and say, well, the most rare mammal that we get around here, of course, would be the African wild dog, perhaps. Maybe, if we were very lucky, a black rhino, and perhaps even cheetah would be considered very rare. But the rarest animal that we get here, Steph?
That's a good question. The rarest animal that you get here is probably the African wild dog, I want to say. Or cheetah, perhaps, is one of the two that comes to mind immediately, but they're the most prominent ones. I think the rarest mammal in South Africa is probably one of the golden moles, which is, they're just a small population that are very isolated in certain areas, and they certainly are up there in probably the top 5. You'll find a couple of spots by golden moles. But I think the most important thing about the rarest animals is not really animals, but it's wilderness areas.
Yeah.
The lack thereof is what's causing the decline in species, and we're just noticing it with species with a very wide home range first, basically.
And certainly the iconic animals are the poster children, if you like, of the conservation movement. But remember, they're probably insects going extinct all over the world, all the time, every day, that we don't know about, some of which have never been described and will never be described by science, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But in terms of rare animals, yes, we like to think of the wild dogs and the cheetahs and the elephants and the black rhino as the poster children, and they're extremely valuable. But we need to consider, of course, those little things, the golden moles, whose role in ecology is almost unknown. We don't even know what they're doing. I mean, sitting right where we are now, under us and all around us, a mass of termites knocking about the place, doing incredibly valuable work for ecosystem function. And it's very important, of course, that we sort of bring that knowledge to people. And I think that's one of the values of Safari Live, and we've been chatting a lot to schools recently, some in South Africa, many in Virginia Beach, Virginia, on the east coast of the United States. Hayden's done some stuff with the United Kingdom, and he's talked to colleges there and universities, and I know he's going to be doing a whole lot more of that in August to a whole lot of schools and I think universities in Australia. And that kind of interaction, I think that's the value, I hope that's the value of what we do for conservation, is that we do give people that connection, but in a holistic fashion. So yes, the chances are you'll come on safari with us and you'll see lions, and you may even be lucky enough to see a leopard with her cubs. But when you're not looking at that stuff, there's so many other tiny little things that we're able to show you. And Steph, of course, does a huge amount on foot out here. And he has an unbelievable eye for spotting tiny little pieces of the ecology out here, without which, I mean, if you remove, say, a mantis species from this area, that mantis that lives on those Waltheria flowers, if you were to remove that mantis from this area, what knock-on effect would it have? We don't know. It might have almost no effect. It might just affect the plant that it helps to pollinate. It might create a knock-on effect that would eventually result in the extinction of an entire plant species, or maybe even a mammal species. So I think that's the kind of, when we talk about rare animals, it's a lovely topic because it can invoke all sorts of other kinds of topics. Let's find out what Jamie's doing and see if she's managed to find any nocturnal creatures of the night.
I hear that you were having a discussion with James about various rare animal species, and I have to tell you that Brian and myself are embroiled in a competition with Brent and Wiem to see which of us can find an aardvark in the early hours of the morning. Now, unfortunately, I fear as though Brian might be on the wrong team here, because unfortunately I seem to have something of an aardvark, I don't know what I'd call it, maybe some kind of aardvark repellent. I have yet to see, despite having grown up in South Africa and having worked in this industry for many years, and in the Kalahari, where aardvark sightings are pretty much a given every single night, I have yet to see a live aardvark in the wild. That is my goal as well for this morning's drive, to see if we can't figure out where they might be. And I've driven all along the roads where I see their tracks regularly, their fresh digging marks. So far they are letting me down, or at least they're just elsewhere. We're traveling along the now eastern boundary of the reserve. It's amazing how the lions use these boundary roads as basically as a sort of a pathway to get from A to B. The lions in particular enjoy doing that, and it makes sense when you think about the fact that otherwise they would have to walk through the trees, which at the moment will be quiet. The dew hasn't settled properly yet, but they will be wet in the next few hours. Plus it's noisy, plus it's a little bit uncomfortable having to duck and dive around the bushes. So they will be walking along on the road. And Joey, in Australia, you were wondering if we have porcupines out here in the Sabi Sand, and yes we do, in theory. Again, another animal that I've seen lots of tracks for, but I haven't yet managed to get on the live drives. And Joey, if you don't believe me, I have evidence, because you know I just happen to keep it lying around. Just up here for a second so I can show you what I'm talking about. There we go, a porcupine. I'll try and illuminate this a little bit better. A nice large porcupine quill, the largest rodent in South Africa. And you've got the black and white coloration. And I'm going to flip it over so that you can have a look. Ah, that's quite distressing. I was going to say so that you can have a look at the sharp point. But the sharp point has been somewhat mangled at some point while it's been riding about in the vehicle with us. So we see these every now and again, and we wait in eager anticipation, or at least I wait in eager anticipation for my first porcupine sighting. These quills, once they are, turn my spotlight off for a moment, they sort of obviously wedged into the porcupine's skin. Now, instead of being able to shoot out the quills, which is something that it has sort of been a rumor or an old wives' tale about porcupines, that they kind of fire them out like spears or something similar, or javelin. That's not how it works at all. So basically what will happen is when a porcupine feels threatened, and because these are modified hairs, they have the muscles attached to them, just like when we get goosebumps. When a porcupine feels threatened, the muscles contract and the porcupine quill raises, so it becomes a weapon. Now imagine a whole body full of these serious spines, and then what happens is the porcupine will turn its back on the threat, bristle, and then rush backwards in a sudden stabbing motion. And that's why you quite often see lions, leopards, any animal that's been a little bit foolish in terms of their approach to porcupines, finding quills embedded in their cheeks. And because they are slightly barbed, getting them out again can be an incredibly uncomfortable experience. Now, here's a fascinating thing about porcupines. Despite their body armory that they have, and they're very, very effective, a porcupine pair is monogamous and mates once a day, at least, very, very carefully to maintain that pair bond. But there you go, Joey, just something I happen to have lying around. We're going to continue on. In the meantime, let's find out how Brent's Mahindra Sunrise Safari is going.
Well, we've covered most of our southern boundary. We've been looking for tracks of a female leopard. It doesn't look like she's crossed in just yet. So I'm hoping we might elephant tracks. So elephants make finding a lot of the big cats a little bit more difficult because of their obliterate them. So we're hoping we've missed her tracks and she's already inside Djuma. We're going to go check one of her favorite hangouts here in the southeast, and one of my favorite roads. Now we are suffering because this little road runs along what we call a drainage line, or a donga, which is basically a small dry river system. Very important, especially going into this drought we have. It's one of the areas where our evergreen trees normally grow, and also it's got a slightly higher water table, so slightly more grass cover than the rest of the areas. So we are hoping that because of the grass cover and the evergreens, there might be some herbivores resting in the area that might attract some predators. Also, a wonderful place to look for porcupine, which Jamie was just chatting about, because they tend to gnaw on quite a few of the root systems of those evergreen trees. We are going to continue on our chilly search for the big cats of Djuma Private Game Reserve. While we do that, let's go back and get warm next to the fire with James.
He is banging on a bit about the fact that we're warmer than him, isn't he? Shame, poor little fellow. Anyway, you know, that's his lot in life, to freeze his long locks off in the wilderness all alone. Well, he's not alone, of course, he's with Brian, who's also freezing his long locks off. Zoe, a nice question from you. You say there seems to have been a groundswell or some kind of increase in awareness worldwide for wildlife. And do we feel that too? Do we think that we're getting through to people? Zoe, I mean, I think certainly the number of viewers we have goes up.
Monthly.
Elephants making a noise next to us. It goes up on a monthly basis. Are people more aware? I think with social media they must be more aware of things. And of course, unfortunately, on the internet, you know that very little is actually vetted. And so while for every piece of good information there is on the internet, you can probably find a piece of bad information on the internet. But I think the collective knowledge of people will filter that kind of nonsense out. And I think you will definitely find that there is an increase of awareness. And certainly out in these rural areas where there are no telephones, there's very little electricity, there's almost no water, there's nothing in the way of sophisticated municipal services, medical care, schools, or anything like that. I mean, there are attempts at all of those things. But every single person out here has got a cell phone.
Yeah.
Somehow, I mean, there's 60% unemployment rate in some of these villages, but everyone's got a phone, everyone's connecting to Facebook, everyone's connecting to some sort of form of social media, and that is making a tremendous difference, I think, to conservation efforts. And I think it probably is where the seed of saving our natural areas will lie. Steph?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about a different thing because
Yeah.
I agree totally with what you're saying, but I also think that people are becoming more aware of the quality of the shows that are coming out of, our quality is increasing all the time, and I'm sure the quality of documentaries that you have access to is, I mean, the things that we're going into and can see for entertainment value has the after effect of making us more aware at a level that actually works for conservation.
And especially, I mean, for us to be in, and I think for many of our viewers, and they will tell you this, I imagine, that to do this in real time it's a different kind of experience, and I'm sure it must be slightly more connecting than watching a traditional documentary. Not that there isn't a place for traditional documentaries, because I still enjoy them very much, but this is just kind of another avenue, if you like. We're going to say goodbye to the Western Plains Zoos, and thank you very much for the work that you do. I know that zoos can be thought of as controversial places. I think they play a massive, massive role, especially in the research of endangered species and as perhaps the last repositories for some of the endangered species around the world. So thank you for the work that you do, introducing people to the wild and to animals, and perhaps sending them out here because of they've been inspired by what you do. So thanks a lot, and have a great rest of your day wherever you are. Well, you're in Western Australia, of course. No, you're not. You're in New South Wales at Western Plains Zoos. Have a good day. Have a good afternoon. We're going to hand you back to Jamie for the next little while.
And so we continue into the dark mornings. What would I describe it as? Just into the dark morning, let's put it that way. And I'm still tracking lions. I've found where I think that male lion from earlier crossed into Djuma. And we're going to slowly follow his tracks west and see if maybe he's not still somewhere on the property. And hopefully one of them decides to give us a bit of a call so that we can narrow down exactly where they are. I know Brent said that he heard some lions calling to the south of our Traverse area, but that doesn't mean that it's all of the Birmingham boys together. So we're going to see if we can't track down where these lions have gone. Just want to check something quickly. Oh, testing our skills here, tracking in the dark. Oh no, apparently not my skill involved in keeping my earpiece in my ear. Oh no, I'm all tangled up now in my cord. I think it's hyena tracks that are wandering along here. I thought leopard for a second, but let's look a bit further ahead. No, it's hyena. Hyenas have been walking along this road. Can look surprisingly similar. They're about the right size for a leopard track, for a smaller hyena. They're difficult to tell the difference. I'm going to try and go along Nyala Road North. That was my plan, to just see. I think hopefully Rusty should have signal there. We can go and investigate that drainage line system, because it's the perfect hiding place for a wandering aardvark. And the aardvarks are going to start already. What time is it? It's just after 5. It's close to 5:30. Already the aardvark are going to start thinking about heading for home. They generally, winter's a bit of an exception, but they generally try and make sure that they're back in their burrows long before the sun has started to rise. And that applies to quite a few of the nocturnal creatures. The bush babies as well. Long before we've detected any hint of a lightening of the sky, they start making their way back to where they plan on spending the rest of their day. And a good morning to Virginia in Kentucky. And Virginia, please forgive me while I answer your question. I'm going to try and fix the earpiece that is determined not to stay in my ear, despite best efforts and despite repeated readjustments. Oh, that's why it's hooked on the... There we go. That makes life a great deal easier. It helps when it's not hooked onto the seat and then pulling itself out. Virginia, you wanted to know what the newest species is to our area. Can I be really lame and say people? Human beings are the newest, almost actually, no. That may or may not be 100% true, because of course lions, hyenas and human beings all evolved together, but the truest human species is probably one of the most recently evolved and recently migrated species in this area. And I'm not talking about us as we drive along in our newly advanced cars. I'm talking about the original people of this area, so around the Stone Age times, the sort of even early Stone Age, where we've got all sorts of evidence, hand axes and those, what are they called? Where they crush grain. Oh, for goodness sake, my brain doesn't work this time of the morning, apparently. Grinding stones for maize. All of those sorts of evidence of primitive tools are around in these sorts of areas, and I think Brent even found a hand axe somewhere in one of the drainage lines of Djuma. So there is evidence of early humans, but they will be one of the latest additions to this evolutionary area. That being said, with the changes in climate and possibly with the drought, but I'm talking on a much larger scale, might start to see changes in the distribution of animals as well. Animals that we might not usually be seeing, and I'm thinking, to be honest, I'm actually thinking more along the lines of birds and insect species than I am about mammal species. Birds that might be more suited to, let's say, I'm not saying this is the case, but let's say, for example, a more temperate area, maybe even an area that is of a higher altitude might start to move into places like this, depending on food availability, or indeed away, but it just depends on how the climate continues to change. And there's a huge citizen research project at the moment in terms of recording the different bird species, and especially the migratory species, but all sorts of bird species, and trying to determine if they're arriving sooner or later, or if their distribution is changing according to changes, sort of meta changes in climate. So citizen projects that have been running for 20, 30 years at a time, because of course you can't really monitor a climate effect over the space of 2 years or 5 years. It's a very, very long-term change that they're looking at investigating. And oh my word, it just dropped 10 degrees. Did you feel that, Brian? Oh my goodness, we didn't even go downhill. What happened? Oh my goodness, my eyes instantly started watering as we came along around that corner. Sure. All right, let's find something so we can stop. No, actually, let's not stop. Let's go find a higher, warmer spot. Oof. And Phoebe in Manitoba, I must just say thank you so much for your incredibly kind message. I think it's one of the greatest joys of the job. So Phoebe sent us a thank you, and for making a difference in terms of bringing this kind of knowledge and information to the public at large. And it's very much appreciated, Phoebe. I'm glad that it's aiding and enhancing the way that human beings understand their connection to the natural world. So thank you very much. For that, I think it's one of my favorite things about this particular job is just the impact that we have, or at least range of the impact that we can have. People across the globe, and because it's live, because it's happening in real life, it means that not that we ever would, but it does mean that we can't make anything up. Everything that you see is true to what is actually happening. There's no editing or scripting. We certainly wouldn't be able to, even if we wanted to. The animals write the stories for us, and it's just up to us to find them. We're going into Nyala Road North now, speaking of finding animals, into the dip here. Maybe that's just why it got so cold as we went through. And I'm going to go looking for aardvark in the Nyala North's drainage line system. So it's a river system that runs through Djuma. Some beautiful big jackalberries. While we investigate each and every large tree that is out here, including these, because they just look like such perfect leopard trees, let's head back to Brent and find out what his plans are.
So far, no luck with the tracks, but we are still on the hunt. Liam and I have a plan. We think the lions are going to start calling again soon, so we're going to try and make our way up towards the northern boundary around Gallagher shortcut. We'll go sit up there and listen for a little bit, and hopefully the silence of the pre-dawn is broken with the roaring of male lions. Speaking of big cats, Joey in Australia is wondering, do the big cats ever come into the camp? Occasionally, we more likely get leopard close to the camp than lions, although the lions are very close, but the leopards sort of actually walk between the buildings of the camp. But we haven't had them in camp for quite a while. We've had them very close to camp, but not in camp for a while. But over the years in the bush, I've had leopard in camp, lion in camp, wild dog in camp, hyena almost every night in camp. Even here, coming to see what it can scavenge. We have to lock away all the rubbish, otherwise the hyena will try to steal the whole bin. We're now going through a very chilly little spot at the bottom of the little drainage system that runs out of Buffle's Hook waterhole. as you can see just on the edge of the light, there are lots of different trees and bushes and grasses in this area. And James Richard is wondering, are there any highly endangered ones in our area? And what are the conservation efforts that are used? Well, James, there are none in our area, so to speak. This is a mixed broadleaf woodland. We don't really have too many endangered species. The endangered species in this part of the world are normally species that are heavily utilized by man. So up in the mistbelt forests, yellowwood trees, stinkwood trees that were good for the woods is very high quality. They are more often used and more often endangered. You're actually not allowed to cut them down anymore, and there's quite heavy protection on those different species. There are some endemic grasses, more flowers and plants. The Fynbos region of the Western Cape's got quite a lot, and there's heavy protection around them. But with all plant species, the biggest threat that faces them is generally overutilization, and then secondly, loss of habitat. Where there is, in our area, the tree species and areas pretty well protected with the Greater Kruger and the private reserves. There might be one or two endemic species that are endangered, but that's more because they only occur in a very small area on one particular mountain in the Lobombos, one particular range of hills. But on average out here in the Greater Kruger National Park, there are not too many endangered tree species. They're protected tree species such as jackalberries, timbuerties, leadwoods, but I wouldn't say they are endangered at all. So far, the hyenas have walked everywhere, but we haven't managed to see one yet. The only tracks we've come across so far Now, a lot of you might have noticed, for the first time ever in Safari Live history, something has happened today. And that tells you what the temperature's like out here. James, aka Commander Bond Henry, is wearing long pants. That is not a common occurrence. And I think it's quite fascinating that he is wearing long pants for the first time ever in Safari Live, on Safari Live. So it is history in the making. Apart from the 4:30 a.m. Central African time start, which is not nearly as interesting as the fact that James is wearing long pants. I think we're going to have to ask him a few questions about that. Now, I've seen some incredible sightings at this time of the morning. Now, I wasn't actually looking for sightings during them. So when I used to live in Botswana, it was about 250 kilometers from town and the office to our camps on the Kwando River. And the vehicles used to come in every 6 or 7 months into town for a full service and whatnot. And then one of my jobs as a teenager, started doing it from about 16, was to drive them back out to camp. And to do this, because I didn't have a driver's license, I used to leave 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning for that very short period that I was driving on a main road where there was a possibility of encountering a police officer. But in northern Botswana, the chances of encountering a police officer between 3 and 6 in the morning is very slim. That's when I used to leave. And on the villages, on the outskirts of Maun, one of the slightly more humorous sightings I saw. But we'll finish that shortly because Jamie's got an animal with a heartbeat.
Well, here goes the bush baby that hopped right across in front of the road. Let me try and get you another... Oh, no, wait, there it goes. Oh no, come back. Don't go. Don't go. No, it's gone. Oh no. That was quite distressing. Shame, it was so cute. It was sitting right in the middle of the road. I love watching them when they're on the ground, bouncing across. So there was a lesser bush baby, or a lesser galago. They unfortunately very seldom stay still for very long. I have absolutely no idea where it went. Oh well, Brian. We'll get another bush baby. Where'd it go? No, I think he's gone further into the bush. All right, well, let us continue on, and while we do, we'll go back to James and Steph at the fire. Lucky them.
Well, welcome back to this. We started to feel a bit chilly here ourselves.
Yes.
The fire started to die down, and we've got the cold creeping in from the outside in, as you can see from James. There's this great coat that he's got wound up around his shoulders. But having a look at the fire, Safari Dean, you've just asked me, is there any particular type of wood that I like to use that keeps bugs away? And of course, the first one that comes to mind is also the most common thing that's going to come to mind, and that would be slivers of tamboti. Thrown into the fire periodically produces quite an aromatic smoke, I suppose, and that keeps clouds of mosquitoes away, flies, and depending on the volume of chips that you throw into the fire, probably people as well. It can be quite toxic.
My grandfather apparently used to have one big piece of tamboti in the house, and they'd have a fire every winter in Johannesburg, because Johannesburg does get very cold during the winter time, and we don't build for the cold. We build as though we live in permanent summer, which we inescapably do not. But he had a log in his house that he would put into the fire for, say, 5 minutes every night, pull it out, and then leave it on the side. And it gives a beautiful smell to the room, but it will, of course, kill you eventually if you inhale it for too long. So you can't kind of leave it on the fire and let it infuse the room, because your whole family will be found dead the next morning. That's very macabre. I didn't mean to get quite so macabre. Now, Sarah, on to a much more cheerful topic of climate change. And I didn't quite get exactly what about climate change you want to know, but I'm going to ask Kirsten to read it through to me again. I'm hoping it's going to come through exactly now. Right, I see. Okay, you want to know if I have seen any effects, subtle or obvious, from climate change. Steph, I'm going to hand this to you, and then I'll give my impressions. What do you think?
I'm unfortunately not the best person to ask about this, because I studied geology at university, and a geologist's time frame spans millions of years, and I'm going to say that we are exactly where we need to be. I'd say the last couple of 100,000 years has been fairly calm in terms of massive climatic changes. We've had a few small ice ages, there's been a few warm spells, but generally speaking it's actually been quite a pleasant place to be on Earth for the last 2 million years or so. So I would say that yes, I mean, we're seeing a drought right now, but in 2012 this place was underwater, 2000 this place was underwater, 2009 we were dry again, 1994 we were incredibly dry, 96 we were wet, so you know, for me it's just the way things are. It needs to be.
For me, I think that we are very quick to attribute any kind of anomaly in the weather pattern to some kind of anthropomorphic climate change, or anthropogenic climate change, and I think that that's a mistake. Do I think that the world is heating up because of human beings? Yes, I do. I do believe that. I think it's pretty much irrefutable, and anybody who says otherwise is either not au fait with the facts or away with the fairies. But is it obvious? Can we actually see it here? And I don't think that we can. I think that especially, geological time is a really good way of looking at it, because, I mean, the Earth's been around, what, 3.5 billion years, correct?
Yeah,
and
4.3, I think.
4.3 billion years. And during that time, remember, human beings have only been around on Earth for about 200,000 years, and we've only sort of had cities and that sort of thing for the last 10,000 years or so, plus minus. And so in terms of geological time, that's nothing. Now, this heating of the earth that's going on as a result of anthropogenic effects since the Industrial Revolution has happened over the last 150 to 200 years, which is, I mean, it's such a minute piece of time that for us to be looking around and attributing things to climate change, given the scale of time that the Earth's been around, I think is quite difficult. I've no doubt that if we were studying very specific things that we knew were really affected, the barrier reef is a very good example.
Yeah.
We think that the Great Barrier Reef is probably dying off because of heating oceans, and we think the oceans are heating probably because of anthropogenic climate change.
Except that
Yeah?
I honestly think that the movement towards a more global approach to how we consume stuff is the right way to go. And the way that we're consuming and the way that we're producing greenhouse gas and all the other toxins that we produce is absolutely a good topic to talk about. But you take instantaneous changes to the Earth's climate. You got massive volcanic eruptions that have done that, meteor strikes, all of these massive earthquakes. They'll all have intense climatic changes at a global scale. And so I don't really think that we can escape what we're doing. I don't think it's uncommon or unusual. I do think, though, that we have to ask the questions: how are we adding to this, and what can we do to stop it? You know, even if we're not having on a global scale in geological time having that much of an effect, but we do have to ask questions about how fast we are burning through resources. That for me is the question.
So, I mean, we can chat more about that a bit later, but let's just quickly, we've got an actual animal to show you, and Jamie's got that now.
Here we go. We've still got our bird. Oh, no, we don't. No, we definitely don't. Well, we're going to try. Here we go. Bird is gone. There was a bird there. So picture something with feathers and wings and two legs with quite round knees. And that was the bird that was there. A nocturnal bird species that is now flying off, so definitely we're not going to have a chance to see. I think it might have settled over there. Let's go and investigate. It's called a dikop. Oh, that's the old name, the name that I grew up knowing about. A dikop, or a thickney, and in this case it is a spotted thickney, and responsible for a lot of the sort of whistling chirps that you hear whilst you're watching the Djuma Dam or the Arathusa Dam camera at night. And particularly, of course, in those areas, the water thickney is what is responsible for that. Unfortunately, though, he or she has well and truly disappeared. Much like our bush baby, unfortunately, Brian, luck is not on our side. We have to change this. And a good morning to Joey in Australia. Aha! Joey, hold on one moment. Oh no, that's a scrub hare, never mind. Thought it was our thickney, but it's a scrub hare. Joey would like to know about the most endangered bird species that we have on Djuma. So Joey, some of the most endangered, strangely enough, are actually the vulture species. Sorry, that scrub hare has... the thickney was hiding next to the scrub hare. Live safaris with things that can fly away from you. So back to Joey's endangered bird species. Vultures are some of the most endangered out here. So vultures throughout Africa, but particularly in this area, face a very serious problem in terms of either carcasses being poisoned, lack of understanding as to how it was they were able to find a carcass. It was almost like they were predicting where an animal was going to die, and this led to this very peculiar belief that if you use a vulture in traditional medicine, it will give you the ability to see into the future. So they're very highly valued as a good luck trinket. Most of the raptors out here will face a threat in some way due to habitat loss, encroachment of power lines, and so on. The secretary birds that you see on Arathusa or Djuma or Cheetah plains are also quite threatened, just in terms of there's actually been a shocking decline in their nesting for some strange and not fully understood reason. It seems as though they are not nesting in their usual spots or as frequently as they might normally. It's generally the larger bird species that are the most at risk, and then every now and again you get a surprise visitor. So a sort of a once or a twice off sighting, like the one of the Egyptian vulture, which are not really, they're not so much endangered as just particularly rare in this area. Eagles of a rose eagle here. They're much more cliff-based birds. I'm trying to think if there are any others. Maybe some of the stork species might also run similar risks to the larger birds of prey. And then the marabou storks. Marabou storks are particularly endangered. First of all, due to a drop in the number of carcasses that they can scavenge, but also because they were just seen as ugly pests. And I mean, a marabou stork, it kind of has a face that only a really affectionate mother could love. They're not the prettiest of birds, but they are very, very important, and in their own way, they're quite majestic. And please forgive me, Brent and myself have been planning our routes so that we divide ourselves equally. Let's just find out where he is. Standing by. Ooh, finger's too cold. Brent, I've just come along Pangolin Track. I think I'm going to make my way along towards Triple M. What's your plan? Copy. I asked Brent what his plans were. He said to stay on the crests. And what that means is he's as cold as we are, Brian. Him and VM are as cold as we are. So the warmest patches, which was actually Brian and myself's plan, we were going to go find ourselves a nice crest and stop there for a while. We haven't quite reached that point. But the drainage lines, so the river systems and the dips, are particularly chilly this morning. Oof. Okay, well, Brian, I'm not going to torture us both by taking us through Philemon's Dip, the place that VM claims is the coldest on Djuma. But I think the Mawati gives it a pretty close run for its money. The Mawati drainage earlier was freezing. Well, let us see, on the subject of Brent and VM and crests, let's see if Brent has managed to find a warmer spot than we have.
So of course, VM and myself are geniuses. Firstly, we're staying on the high ground, which means it's about 3 degrees warmer than down at the bottom. And we've come up to this high spot to listen for lions. And as we did it, a male lion has roared, probably no more than 100 meters from us. But unfortunately, he's in Buffalo's Hook. But this is the area, I'm pretty sure it's the same one Jamie had tracks for earlier. Now, if he's roaring, he's on the move. And I'm hoping he's going to be on the move towards us. Just there, that's so frustrating. I'm hoping he walks down this road right at us. Now what we're going to do in the meantime is I think we'll check down towards Sydney's and then come back and wait here to see if he roars again. It's so close. Let me just let Jamie know. Jamie. So of course Jamie and I are the only two vehicles who are out at the moment. Jamie, I just had that Wanuna Ngala calling probably 100 meters from the Buffelshoek sign to the north. I'm going to hang around in this area and hopefully comes southwest.
Copy, awesome. You can but hope.
Yeah, as Jamie says, we can but hope. Now I'm hoping there might be some other lions around. Maybe they've headed towards Sydney's waterhole for a drink. And maybe our little side-striped jackal friends might be about. It's so tantalizingly close, that lion. I'm feeling lucky. Liam, are you feeling lucky? I think the lion's going to come visit us. Oh, I love that sound. It makes me forget about the cold and get excited. Now, for me to have heard that over this engine, that's how close he was. This is a very loud diesel car, so it sounds somewhat like a tractor. I think we found lots of Impala. Okay, lights off. Thought I saw what possibly might have been a jackal beyond them. Scampering away. Around here. What is that there? No, that's a steenbok. But this area seems to be a very busy line at the moment around Buffelshoek cut line, Sydney waterhole. Hopefully it continues to be so, and hopefully this morning lion who's wandering in the pre-dawn a little bit to the south and west. So while we keep checking for lions, let's go see how warm.
Well, mercifully, everybody, the eastern horizon is beginning to actually light up, which means that today has now begun. And we've just been listening to the same lines that I think Brent could hear. They've stopped now, and they do seem to be, unfortunately, off Djuma at the moment. So, nice question from Mike there about human populations and Kruger National Park. I think specifically around resources in the year 2050. There seems to be some big resource year that year. And Steph, you had some opinions on that.
I've only heard a few sketchy reports coming from the Kruger National Park about how they are aiming towards 2050 and a more incorporated park. So at the moment you have this conservation structure which is dominant in the province. I mean, it creates a massive amount of employment, it creates a massive amount of scientific investigation or interest, and then obviously tourism as well, worldwide. But it has very little relevance apart from money generated by income to the populations that are right on the outskirts and the borders of the park, and that is going to change by 2050. So if I were to say what significant steps or changes we're going to see by 2050, it would be the fact that local communities are going to have a more beneficial role to play in the park, and we'll see more direct benefits from the park and the way that the Kruger National Park is structured. At the moment, like I said, it's very limited to income derived from employment, and that's about it. There's nothing else, and we will see a much broader shift of focus onto populations next to the park. So that's about it from what I know, at least anyway, of what's happening.
So I mean, just to give you an idea, I mean, there are 4.5 million people living on the borders of the Kruger National Park. On the western borders in Mozambique, there are even more. And you know, in many of the great parks of East Africa, there are no fences around the parks, and I mean that there's a kind of buffer zone between where, I guess, village proper starts and then where park proper starts. And so you have this buffer or intermediary zone where wildlife and cattle, for example, live in, well, relative harmony.
Limited harvesting.
Yeah, and there's limited harvesting of plants and that sort of thing. So I think that would ideally be the kind of situation that we want to create here. But mostly, there's no benefit, or if people cannot see a benefit to having the park here, then eventually, you know, the poverty around the wildlife areas of Africa is going to overwhelm the parks. But I think certainly my research has indicated that people out here overwhelmingly do see a benefit to the park. They do see it as a place that is highly important both to conservation and to employment and to income derivation, and they would like to be more active stakeholders and shareholders in that sort of thing.
Must be.
Yeah, and so I think that's probably where the park will go from there. Now, I have got my camera in my hand here, of course, and that is because I am learning to take pictures, and I take fairly bad pictures. Jean-Andre has been giving me some pointers, basically as brutally, honestly as well. I've been known to give feedback to people about various things, and so I'm feeling very dejected and sad right now because some of my pictures, he said, were... I said, what did you think of this picture, Jean-Andre? And he said, I think you should delete it. That was the sole compliment that he had about my picture that I took of everyone here at the fire. I'm going to try again, and while I do that, let's go to Jamie.
Well, I hear that Brent has been listening to the lion that we were attempting to track this morning along Buffel's Hook Cut Line just to the north of our Traverse area. Now I'm taking a long shot and hoping that maybe the lions that Brent heard calling to the south might be on their way to join up with their buddy, or that the Birmingham boys are going to start moving west in response to the presence of the Matimbas. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drive across to our western boundary now. We've done a very thorough boundary check this morning, and go and investigate and see if they haven't been attracted, or whether or not they've realized that the Matimba males have sort of snuck in to the boundary of their territory and just been hiding there. So 2 days ago they were on a buffalo kill in the drainage line close to the Arathusa Lodge. That buffalo kill was then usurped by the Tsalala Pride. And James and Brian had the most extraordinary sighting. It was with you, wasn't it, Brian? Yeah. Most incredible sighting of an elephant charging the lions yesterday. Let's go and investigate, since the western edge of Djuma seems to be happening an interesting play of different dynamics. Let's go over to Brent, who's got one of our other little canid species.
So we have found our little jackal friends out at Sandy Patch. There we go. Hello, little side striped. And they are feeling the cold this morning, curled up in little balls. They're probably going to become a little bit more dusk and dawn. And there's the other. Oh, there's the lion again. So I'm just going to keep quiet. So that lion's on the move. Sounds like he's heading slightly more northwest, which is not great for us. And I know one of James Richards' favourite little creatures is the jackal, and said seeing a jackal in the dawn would be great. I'm just keeping quiet. I'm trying to listen to see if that male lion gets an answer from another lion. Nothing yet. So I was saying jackal, the side-striped jackal are quite crepuscular, and what that means is they are most active at dusk and dawn, so it's still a little bit early for them. They should be waking up in probably another 45 minutes to an hour, and they might even just laze about in the sun and warm up before they start moving. In this area, they've been feeding a lot off the guarri bushes. Oh, we got spider webs everywhere this morning. So the little fruit of the guarri, very sweet, very nice fruit, and I've actually seen them feeding off it quite a lot. And it's the same as what the baboons are moving through these areas after, so competing with the jackal for the fruit of the guarri bush. Now it sounds like that lion might move and come out around Sydney's waterhole. So evil Pegasaurus. Now that is an interesting handle. Would like to know, what is the general sleeping routine for the lions? Now the lions sleep on average for about 20 out of 24 hours. And they are active in bouts. So I heard them before I went to bed around 9:30 making a big ruckus calling. And then they went to sleep for a while. Now, they might sleep for an hour, they might sleep for 20 minutes before moving, but generally this is a really good time to catch them moving. Oh, there he is, roaring again. That's not good for us, I'm afraid. Sounds like he is heading further north. So that line is sort of over there, and it sounds like he's going that way, sort of northwestish. But there are 4 of them, so there could be another one about. It definitely sounds like a male. Now a lot of people say they can tell the difference between a male and female lion. Oh, I think we probably get it wrong half the time, but to me it sounds a few octaves deeper, but we are quite close. At a distance, male and female sound exactly the same to 99% of people out there, I would say. Now, I'm going to go back up onto the high ground where he is calling from. Hopefully we'll get a response from another lion that we can follow.